So welcome, everyone. I think we're going to get started. My name is Vera Trainer. I'm the Marine Science Director here at ONRC. I've been here for a little while, like 3 years now. It's really nice to see a few new faces. So welcome. The evening talks are about once a month. And the next one will be Tuesday, May 5th, Olympic Peninsula Timberland Management. Pacific Forest Management's role in the management of Olympic Peninsula forests. And that's Jeff McGinley from Pacific Forest Management, a lot of management in there. But I wanted to make a brief announcement before I introduce the speakers. There will be a custodial appointment announcement for here at ONRC. It's 20 hours or more per week. It's a job, and the 20 hours can increase depending on how much there is to do. It will also have University of Washington benefits, including retirement, sick leave, and health insurance, which I can tell you are very generous. So our current custodian is leaving. The staff here is amazingly nice, as Derek can attest to. So I'm so excited to bring a very unusual talk to you. We usually have PowerPoint and it's very scientific. I think this one's going to be more conversational, which I'm excited about. So Victrinia, Vic, and Eric are here to talk to us about bonsai. And I want to read just a little bit of the abstract that they provided for this talk because I think it's so beautiful and poetic. By weaving together living trees, cultural objects, and seasonal materials, this work invites both Indigenous and non-Native audiences to experience bonsai as something more than a transplanted Asian tradition. It becomes a bridge honoring the origins of the art while rooting it in the lands, cultures, and waters of this region. The result is a living dialogue between tradition and place, offering a new way to see bonsai as a practice of reverence, belonging, and ecological relationship in the Pacific Northwest. So welcome, Vic and Eric.
Thank you so much. And we're not doing this talk today with any kind of microphones. We're just recording via the laptop. If anybody has any difficulty hearing me or Eric, please raise your hand so that I'll know to speak up, though normally that's not much of a problem for me. So Eric and I have been practicing the art of bonsai, and I will say we are artists. We are not scientists, though I will say there's a lot of horticultural knowledge, and a lot of cultural knowledge that we're gaining through our practice. But we primarily approach this as artists, as people who love line and form and expressions of beauty that speak to us and remind us of things we might have seen in years gone by, or are far more natural and wild and gnarly. And we love those words, and only art really can let you enjoy the meat of those words. So our practice has been going for about 20 some odd years now together. And in bonsai, we're kind of a rare bird in the sense that most bonsai artists who occupy a garden or a space and do it professionally at any level are individuals. And they have a spouse or partner or loved one who is often called the bonsai widow. But for our household, it has literally been, it's ironic, we did this whole write-up about different things recently, and I was like, oh, it's a bonsai love story. Because we met through bonsai. We met online through a forum, and eventually Eric came to Washington to be with me because this is bonsai Mecca. We get to grow almost everything, anything, and it flourishes here. We don't have the overwintering struggles of our friends who live in Aspen, or our other friends who live in Minnesota, in Brainerd, Minnesota. And so our bonsai life is a lot easier in some ways, and we get to have a little bit more fun. So we wanted to be able to share with you today about formal display, which this is a representation, a formal display of bonsai. And we use it as a way to really help people interpret the tree, the season, and other cultural references in the objects that we place with it or with the plants. And so I wanted Eric to be able to talk about that a little bit.
So,
You gotta get on the screen.
oh, I guess I have to stand in front of the thing.
I'll move.
But some of the elements that are important in formal display, especially something like this display, which would normally be in a tokonoma in a Japanese home, display alcove. Most of the homes traditionally have them. They still have them today. This is a similar representation to that to kind of tell a story. And in our particular case, there are a number of elements. And they involve often a table to place the tree on. The tables were actually adapted writing tables. And then they became their own thing later on. But this kind of represents that idea of this floor sitting table, what you would have written on, like the literati would have been writing on. These were adapted to display the trees. And the trees are then placed to one side or another, depending on the directionality and the flow and the movement of the tree. But generally, you're trying to create a combined circular flow so that you're looking at the thing at the display, but you don't get pushed out. You stay kind of focused within the window and the circle of the display. For the seasonality in place, many times items and or plants are used to help you define the space. And those are often accent plants. These are either shitakusa or small kusamono. Those words aren't important. They're little accent plants nearby. And oftentimes scrolls are used to help kind of provide another part of the story. And one of the things that's really key to this, and that you'll see through a lot of the displays that we put up today, is that they also kind of adapt the Japanese aesthetic of not hitting people over the head with a 2x4, which is a very kind of American idea. If I put 14 items all in the same thing that tell you the story, you have to get it, right? And that often ruins the entire painting. We are painting a picture. This is just a picture painted with live things and live elements. So sometimes we leave them out, and you don't have to get the exact story that I'm trying to tell. It's okay for you to make up your own story. It's okay for you to have your own interpretation. Just because you don't get the story I was trying to tell, that's fine. And it's actually sometimes really interesting to have people tell me the story that they get, and not tell them the one I was trying to tell them in the first place. Because sometimes they're just better than me. So that's kind of a description about what you're seeing within this space. It's not just about displaying the trees and making them look cool, but there's also a lot of storytelling inside of that space. Inside of that space, it's one of the places that Indigenous culture aligns with a lot of what we're trying to do. And that is that storytelling is an important part of Indigenous culture. And in our case, we're trying to find places and ways to use the storytelling aspects and adapt them to the place in which we live in the Pacific Northwest. We do not live in Japan. If I were to put a scroll up of a koi jumping up a waterfall, you would have no idea that that means the symbol of courage and a massive story about the koi. It would mean nothing to you. It's not supposed to mean anything to you. But it would mean something in Japanese culture. There's a lot of things in that way that we're trying to adapt to stories that mean things to Americans, that mean things to people in the Pacific Northwest, that mean things to people in the central United States, which is what you're actually seeing in this particular display, is a very typical Americana display. For those who can see deep into the scroll, there's a split rail fence in a barn. And it's a traditional, typical red barn tucked way back into the scroll. That gives us this idea of this middle American traditional winter kind of picture. The rest of the tree and the fern, you don't need to know where they're from. Just looking at the picture gives you this kind of idea in this place. But the scroll is the place actually setting the story for you. And the rest of it you can just accept. And the rest of that day, if you just hear or feel the space that we've created, that's all that we were actually trying to do. There's more to the story, and I'd like my wife to talk more about the traditional aspects of that when we talk about Indigenous language and how we're moving away from the traditional Japanese storytelling and the very American and Americana storytelling into telling stories that actually relate to the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to be moving stuff.
Yes, he is a really good schlepper. He is not for hire. He's mine. But and just to speak to that Americana story, this is a very beautiful deer fern, which I love it. It's beautiful for use in bonsai display because the scale of the fern is so dainty that it doesn't destroy the proportional visual that it creates with the tree, which, by the way, is a collected Western red cedar from the traditional lands of the Quinault. So it would have been collected from a bog, probably not very far away from ocean shores. And it is, because it grew in the bog for such a very long time, it actually has been dwarfed because of the pH balance of the water that it was sitting in. And therefore, it is not unusual in species like that and in those locations to have 100 years per caliper inch on the tree. In order to be able to count those rings, we would have to take below it, if we took a sawed off plate of the lower trunk root that we didn't need because we've propagated roots up high, then we could send that away to the University of Washington and they'd be happy to help us count the rings, which is something that has been done on these collected trees from these really harsh and extreme environments. But one thing I want to show you while moving this little guy is that up here, up front, I love him. I bought this for Eric for Christmas. It is a tiny little bronze of a dog. And I've got this beautiful little jute rug for him to sit on. And when I imagine this, and he's sitting there in relationship with the tree and the barn and the idea of that idyllic farm space, I can just imagine the farmhouse he's sitting in front of a fire with mom and dad and all the kids running around. And in my head, I go to this very warm and soothing space in thinking about those things. So we use objects of all kinds in order to tell the stories. And so that's just a really important piece. And so I'd like to move on. And sadly, I will say, they gave us 45 minutes to do something that would normally take me 3 hours. From the standpoint of, I don't get to spend as much time describing the horticultural considerations, the design work that went into the tree, how many years it takes to be able to collect them and have them survive before you can even start working on them. It's not unusual for us after a tree has been collected from native grounds, not native grounds, but from where it was growing, to take about 5 years before you feel really confident that tree is going to be stable and happy and survive. And it's a very slow process to move it from larger boxes to smaller things, and eventually into a pot. Bonsai is not a fast art. You really have to be willing to stay the course, spend the time, and love them where they are while being able to have a vision of the future. So even as beautiful as this is to me now, it's only still just beginning in its journey as a bonsai with us. We've only had it for about 10 years. About 10 years. So that's not very long in terms of bonsai. Bonsai people are a very rare breed. We don't go on things like summer vacation. I haven't been on one in 20 years because one of us, or I send him off, or he sends me off, and we go individually. But we don't actually get to vacation together. So, because we have about 100 trees at home. And the 100 odd trees at home, not including the immature ones, require daily watering in the summer, especially. And if it's hot, twice a day. And do you guys remember the heat dome? We watered for every single 90 minutes of daylight, we watered the entire backyard every 90 minutes. And basically, we'd swap. One person would go out, and 90 minutes later, somebody else would go out, get it done, come back in. And what was crazy is the trees that we put underneath of a tent in order to protect them as much as we could grew this much. It was quite vexing because it was a redwood too. So I was like, but yeah, it grew. It grew a lot. Everything grew. It was quite crazy. But that's the level of devotion and care that we have to give to them. So these trees don't look this way by accident. This is nurturing that is 365 days a year and a full commitment. So at this time, I want to be able to talk about how with just changing the scroll and the objects with the tree, we're now telling a seasonal story with overtones of Skokomish, Indigenous heritage. So this is a cedar bentwood box, and it is made by a Skokomish artist named Andrew Peterson, and this is a mourning dove. When we did this display at the end of summer, just at the end of summer, when we did this display, we posted the traditionally this scroll might be interpreted as a moon, but I also see it as that early morning sun when the mist is really heavy and it's just burning through. And so at the time when we showed the tree, it was during the migratory pattern in the fall of the male mourning dove birds. So they go from Washington down south. And when I picked up this box, and it's a true cedar bentwood box from the artist, his wife handed me these feathers because the birds in passing had dropped them. And so they were in her yard when I went to go pick up the box. And she looked at me and she said, "These are supposed to go with the box." And I was like, "Yes, they are." And I was so thrilled because it was that time of year when the birds were moving and the box, and it was a kind of synchronicity because I hadn't planned on creating a fall, late summer male migratory bird pattern using Coast Salish art to tell this story of that time with the morning sun just burning through that late summer, early fall mist. And it was really quite profound for me.
We actually had a different scroll plan with the display, but as soon as the feathers showed up, that changed the display and the story by moving the time of day to the early morning. We use the scroll, and it's actually like we said, it's a moon scroll intended to be a moon. But in this particular case here in the Northwest, this is a traditional picture of what that early morning mist looks like. In Japan, this is actually like a late summer hot evening.
But hot and sticky outside.
I mean, it's hot and sticky outside, but for us, the picture means something different. So we can change the time to align with the place.
And of course, the coolness of the colors in the box, along with the scroll, just really builds on that layer. It's like layers of a cake, and it's all tasty if you like cake, which I do. And so this is one of the first really strong forays into our attempting to use, and mind you, I am not an Indigenous person's expert. I am an Indigenous woman, but I am from the island of Guam. And what I have found because of my work in this region, working with cancer survivors amongst the various tribes, is that there's actually not a lot of difference in the the way in which they move in the world and in their communities and with one another and with the earth is very similar to my own people. And so whenever I'm there, I feel like I'm at home. I'm crowded with aunties. I am surrounded by my village. My people are very village centric, and we actually believe in that idea of reciprocity and sharing in the same way that our beautiful Indigenous neighbors do. So this became a passionate way for me as a displaced Indigenous woman to be able to correlate local traditions with my own sensibilities around these kinds of ideas.
Speaking of
Speaking of islands, so in terms of objects, and I thought this was really fun. And of course, when we're all done talking, we really are going to invite you to be able to come and look at things that you're curious about. But the object in this part of the display now, in this tray, there is this beautiful, hold this up for people who are on the screen, crab. And this beautiful bronze tempai, which is what they call it in Japan, is a sea coastal, obviously, creature that they would use to display the trees that would be found on the coast. And then this beautiful little thing here. Who knows what this is? It is a fishing float. Put it across the entire Pacific Ocean to get here from Japan. As a general rule, that's where they came from. So this beautiful little fishing float got lost off of a net, picked a coastal town in Japan, and made its way across to us. And so for me, there was this beautiful tie-in between our coast and the wildlife there, and this beautiful object that came from Japan that we get to use in interpreting this beautiful form of art that they did such a beautiful job of refining and we've taken on. So this is a very kind of a coastal kind of a feeling, and hopefully it evokes for people who get to come up and see it even closer, this idea of your own forays to the beach, your own beach combing. And what's very special about that sand is that's actually sand from Guam, which is where I'm from. And so I was able to use sand from my own land with this beautiful little object that floated across the sea, with this beautiful tree that came from a coastal area in our beautiful state. And all of these things come together so harmoniously. It's really hard not to be in love with them in their own way. And so they're just very joyful for us, and we so enjoy being able to share that. Now he's going to change things. Does anyone have any questions yet? Oh, we're changing the scene right now. You're going to get a whole new thing just in a moment.
That one.
There's more. There's more. Yes.
So, you talk about sort of this slow art and, how much time this takes. And I mean, it just blows my mind how you can be in possession of an 80-year-old tree because you're not 80 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess my question is, and I think there's an opportunity there too. Do you see many young people interested in bonsai?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we are young people in bonsai. And when we started, we were really young people in bonsai. Eric was still in his 20s. I was in my early 30s. The average age of most people are long-term practitioners of bonsai because most people don't have enough time. We both work full-time jobs and do this. And so because of that, the average age of the individuals getting into it are in their 60s and 70s. And if they've been in a really long time, then they may be in their 90s and still practicing. And so we have what ends up happening over time is what we call legacy trees. So I have trees in my collection that were by the hands of amazing masters in American bonsai that have come into my garden and then I caretake them. And someday, well, I've already told all of our apprentices and students, if we die in a car accident or something crazy, break into the back of the garden, take home all of the trees and all of the pots, because we would want it dispersed. We would want it to go into our community. Beautiful.
I did it.
Yes. So now what we have here is still Coast Salish, but this is up into British Columbia, the northern end of Vancouver Island, as well as even our area here. Because the basket on the table, some people say that it could be Nuka, and other people say it's Makah. I personally tend to believe that it's Makah. The moon form line art was done by its A-list Indigenous artist named Raven Walden. And that tree was dug out of the ground by his truly on the north end of Vancouver Island from an ancient bog where a tree like that would have been prostrate and air layering itself along the ground. And then Eric went in with a saw and was able to extract it with just enough rootage to be able to bring it back. And a tree, massively full-sized, up on the berm above the same rise of land, but just higher out of the bog, full-grown, full-size, regular, standard, upright sentinel of Alaskan yellow cedar, which is what this is. And so with this, we're really paying an homage to the Nuka sentiment of it, because in this basket, which is quite beautiful, this is made out of bear grass, cedar bark, maidenhair fern branches. And so this is about 100 years old. You can see the color differentiation to the inside of the lid versus the part that has been exposed to the sun. And inside of it are rose hips. And I invite you not only to come and look at them, but just smell them. Like, pick it up, smell it. They're just have this soft, slightly citrusy scent even still. And the reason why these are wonderful tools to use in expressing our Coast Salish traditions is Nootka rose hips are a superfood. And in the winter, which is when we intended and did display this, what happened is that the show that we did this for fell over the very first moon of February, which is oftentimes called the hunger moon in various Native traditions, because in the first moon of February, they regard it as a spiritual cleansing time because they're hungry. The food is running out. It's deep cold. It's darkest days. And so they turn it into an inward spiritual journey. And things like the Nootka rose hips preserve them. They're superfoods, so they're full of antioxidants, they're full of vitamin C, and they pound them into cakes, they make them into teas, they do all kinds of things with them. And so it is a vital food that keeps them healthy in the most desperate time of the year. And so the full moon was very symbolic to be able to show with the Nootka rose and how do you say the name of that tree?
Calotropis nucatensis.
He loves saying that, so I definitely did not want to take that away from him.
Every time they change it, somebody gets a PhD.
What was it before that?
Was Camasiferous nucatensis.
Oh, yes, and then it became Calotropis.
And there was one in between, I guess.
Yeah, anyways, yes, PhDs ensued. And so this is a very traditional cultural expression of the bonsai as far as its region and location for where it was collected, as well as the art that's being represented with it, the time of year with that very cold first moon in February, and then the foods that sustain them and keep them healthy and safe. So it's just this very, again, layered on layer of really being able to look at the culture and how they have collected wisdom over time. I will make a couple recommendations because Eric and I are really learning a lot as we're trying to help create these expressions of understanding with Indigenous culture. And so one of the funnest books, if you are a plant nerd, this is the Ethnobotany of Western Washington, The Knowledge and Use of Indigenous Plants by Native Americans. This was written in 1945. It's so good, it's still in publication. And so if you love plants, I highly recommend getting this. It's available on Amazon. Awesome. And then for being able to tell stories, I got this book, which is The Folk Tales of the Coast Salish, because the Coast Salish very much are storytellers. And with what we're doing is we're trying to help tell stories that can help you not only understand culture and what their native wisdom looks like, but also learning more about the place that you live. And I love it.
Yeah, and a lot of it too is learning how the process by which the stories are told, how the stories are formulated, and through that process of learning how the stories are formulated, what's important, we can formulate our own stories, new stories, in the same traditions. So we don't lose the traditions, we don't trample the traditions, we adopt the traditions to tell stories that are meaningful, but also meaningful to us in the same storytelling mechanism. So we sort of adopt the dialect of telling stories in the same way. And then I have to change it into another completely different display.
And this one's going to come with a story. So, and interestingly enough, because I brought this as an example, even though I'm not using it, whoops, this is a carved cedar feather, also done by a British Columbia artist. And I'm looking forward to finding the right moment and tree, because it really is about collecting the artifacts, collecting the items, and doing your research and learning, and then finding those moments where it all makes sense. And I have not found the tree yet that's going with this, but I will end up hanging it much in the same way the form-line moon is. And it will be a culturally grounding piece and telling a different story.
Let me do this for the benefit of the folks on the camera.
Up, there you go.
Right.
Up, there you go. So
And the
on
little
with
map.
that
Thank you.
cheetah, that little cheetah is a mouse. And she's actually a mama mouse. She's rather happy and grateful looking, and she's holding her baby. And she's really grateful. I got to turn her the right way because her orientation is towards the tree. She's looking at the tree in gratitude. So let me tell you a story. You can think about it as you go to bed tonight. So long, long ago, and this is a story that's told in different ways by different families and different traditions and different tribes, but the essence of the story is still true. So long, long ago, there was a great fire, and all of the animals were running away from the fire. They were fearful for their lives. They were running away, and they fled as far and as fast as they could. And yet, the little mouse, it couldn't go very fast, and it couldn't flee fast enough to outrace the fire that was coming. And the little mouse knew that it might die. And so the little mouse went to the Douglas fir and asked the Douglas fir if it would protect it. And the Douglas fir opened up its cones, and the little mouse crawled inside of the cone, and the Douglas fir closed up around it, and the fire came through, and the fire raged on, and the little mouse lived. The Douglas fir protected the little mouse. And what happened after that is the little mouse was so grateful for the protection that was provided by the Douglas fir that it left behind its hind legs and its tail, which are the little flags that you can see poking out of every Douglas fir cone you've ever seen. And so amongst the Native people, this story of taking care of the most vulnerable, protecting one another in times of great crisis, and having that shared experience is expressed in being able to tell the story of how the Douglas fir saved the little mouse. And so it was protecting the vulnerable, expressing generosity, refuge in danger, and reciprocity between beings. And all of, not all, but most of the Native stories that are told are about providing these life lessons, about providing these legends in order to teach us how to be with one another. Insofar as the Alaskan yellow cedar is concerned, it is held as a tree, not that is made with the great canoes, because they've got the Western red cedar for that. But the yellow cedar is one of the most resilient woods in our forest, more so than probably any other. And so amongst the natives, it is said that the tree that lives long teaches people how to live long. This idea of slow, of measured, of being in place and rooted. And so the trees each have their own meaning. Among the Makah, this plant has meaning. The deer fir that I showed you earlier, this accent plant, amongst the Makah, the children would be taught that if they were lost in the woods, that this plant was what they needed to find because they could eat it. The rhizomes, they could dig them up and eat them to help sustain them until they could be found. And so this plant has this symbolic meaning of, being available to them in an emergency, this sustenance that the children could go look for. And there's so many ways in the plants that we take for granted all around us right now, where indigenous medicine, the licorice fir, it's an expectorant. It's used to help cure coughs traditionally in their medicine. All of these things provide them so much care from their native environment. And it is such a beautiful thing to be able to provide anyone who's curious or to become more curious about native culture, our native plants, the environment that we live in, and why taking care of it in a place like this, the Olympic Natural Resources Center, is so vital to the health and well-being of our forests and all of us. And so it's very much a heartfelt thing for us to be able to be here and to share this with you. And that is largely the conclusion of our actual presentation. And we'd love to be able to open it up for conversation, questions, etc.
All of your trees you gathered as older trees.
This tree, when it was collected in Minnesota, would have probably been about 40 to 60 years old. And then it was trained for about 27 years with the person who had it, who then brought it to me as his gift to me. And now it is in our keeping and our caregiving. As a matter of fact, when I want to share this, because this is an eastern larch, it's a deciduous conifer. And someday when I want to show it, I actually have this really beautiful, tiny Osage crafted snow sled. And I want to show this tree in winter with the snow sled. And I've been trying to figure out what I want to do for the hanging piece, but I was thinking that I would love to get a native artist to either do me a bead work item or even a jingle dress piece of fabric with the tin jingles on it, because I feel like that would highlight this tree to its cultural roots and identity most perfectly with the Ojibwe artifacts with it.
And then the fact that we've kind of led on that this happens to be an eastern larch, and yet the story was about a Douglas fir. One of the things that we sometimes have to do is actually use one species of tree to stand in for the storytelling of another. And in this case, this tree is standing in for the Douglas fir in the storytelling. The Douglas fir cones tell you that that's what that's supposed to be. And this is just a stand-in in that case. We have at home like a 4.5 foot tall Rocky Mountain juniper that is actually the stand-in for um, Sequoia giganteum. Because I can't really make a decent bonsai out of giganteum, I can do it with another juniper, and in this case, a very tall Rocky Mountain juniper that has been completely styled to not look like its natural shape, but it's been styled to look like a completely different tree. Um, but as it's rather tall, it looks a lot like gigantea. And it, like I said, is generally going to be used as the stand-in for the storytelling of the great forests of California. And that's where its life will live. We have a number of, I'm not even on the camera, but we also have a number of coastal redwoods that we use as well. And those have like a different kind of storytelling process. So we aren't just sticking to the storytelling of this place, but looking at the storytelling of each place. And this country is vast and has a massive number of storytelling opportunities. But looking at the trees in each space and what can actually be done to tell the stories, that means that we just have to continue to move around and isolate the stories. This particular tree can be used for several types of storytelling, much like the Douglas fir and its actual species, telling the story of its actual species. We even sometimes use it for stand-in for our local, commonly referred to as tamaracks, but the local larches. We will sometimes use it as a stand-in for our local larches here as our Western larches. They're very hard to actually collect.
Derek has done it.
I know Derek has turned out that he can do it. I'm gonna bug him for his secrets later. But like this tree is sometimes used actually to stand in for those. So this is actually our biggest stand-in. This is our absolute #1 Hollywood tree. It fakes out everybody on all kinds of stuff. But we will do that from time to time just to tell the story. It doesn't have to be absolutely accurate. It doesn't have to be absolutely precise. I'm an extraordinarily pedantic person. If you actually know me in my real everyday life, this is the place where I stop being pedantic about everything. And we can take on just those artistic spaces of let it be open, let it be free, and feel the spaces that you're working in. And it's just important that when you see them, if people just appreciate them from what they are, you don't need to know the Douglas fir story. But if you do, and now you guys do, if you do, you can appreciate it even more.
And you're never going to look at a Douglas fir cone the same way ever again.
It's
a whole new meaning for you. Now that's the protection of the little mouse, and it's this beautiful thing. Any other questions? Yes, sir. You, sir, in the black. Or
It's
blue. Blue, sorry. Back there. You.
It's clear that you have to find these in situations where they're really growing from stress.
Yes, extreme stress.
That prevent you dying or to start to grow.
So here's the interesting thing about bonsai. Pot horticulture by itself creates its own tension of stress. So this tree is never going to try and grow up to be a full-size tamarack or larynx ever because it's in that pot. We keep them because of the constriction of the roots and the way that we care for them and feed them and water them and the soil that they're in, because they're not actually in dirt. They're actually in 100% inorganic material. It's all volcanic aggregates that the trees will not, as long as they're in that pot, do anything other than that. Now, if I neglected it, it could grow long and straggly and thick, but it's not going to grow tall. And I could blow what we call the form if I ignored it, but we don't. And so therefore it's the maintenance, the constant maintenance year to year. And, you know, when you get to work with people with their collections and their constantly applying good technique as you're working with them. You just get to see the trees just refine, refine, refine. And it's just this beautiful co-journey of teaching and learning with the people that we get to work with. So we have a lot of fun as teachers and as mentors to other people. But the science all by itself is that if I took that tree out of that pot and planted it out there in that grass, it would turn into a full-size tree. It would run and run and run and run, and it would do all the things that a tamarack wants to do, a larix wants to do. And because it's in that pot, because that one is in that pot, et cetera, all of these constrictions create that same dwarfing, edaphic dwarfing is what it's called when they're under that kind of stress. But we keep them healthy by the constant maintenance and the constant scrutinizing of what we're feeding them. We feed them micro and macronutrients of all kinds, from everything from kelp emulsions, worm teas, specialized fertilizers we get from Japan, and many other things, including a really great product, which, you know, is called Jax, which is an American-made product, which is great for growing things. So by their feeding and their constant attendance, that's how we keep them looking like this.
Well, by the time you put it in that, you're not trimming its roots anymore, but I mean, is that part of the process to trim roots?
Yes. So, but we don't do it nearly as often as people who have younger trees. So, if you have really young material, you'll tend to repot them more because you're trying to develop that ramification. That's the word that we use, ramification, where it shows all the bifurcations. So as below, so above. So if you have lots of tiny little roots in there, you're going to have lots of tiny little branches above. And so Eck describes it as bonsai math. We're not going to get into that because that is a little bit of science, where the tree will be repotted, but we don't tend to repot trees as often as many people. So it's not unusual for us to go 6, 7, 10 years before we repot the tree. And it has to do with how advanced the tree is when we get it. And at that point, even if it's a really mature bonsai, where it's been in pot culture for decades and decades, then we might just come in and trim the edges and trim the bottom with a saw. We're not really even going to pick them out, and then just nestle them in a new space of fresh dirt around their edges and on the bottom, and they'll just keep on going like nothing's ever happened.
I mean, the inorganic soil is sort of a form of hydroponics. So it's just there to actually support the root system and provide, each of the materials has a different purpose. One provides space for air and oxygen exchange, one holds moisture better, and then there's a clay substrate that has a large number of cation exchange sites. So that's what actually holds the organic fertilizers that we use. And then as we water, it releases organic fertilizers constantly to the tree. So it's basically a form of hydroponics. At least I like to explain it that way, and it tends to make a lot of sense to people as to why we actually do that. But
the only real danger with bonsai is when the tree can no longer breathe through the watering process. So when you water, as the water is going into the roots through the soil, it's sucking air in with it in this process. And that air goes in. And what most people don't realize is that trees, for their optimal wellness, don't actually absorb water, they absorb vapor. So that's why we use the inorganic materials in order to have these little pockets of air and little pockets of water where they get together and say, hello. And then boom, we have a beautiful, softly moist environment consistently where we're not flooding or choking the plant. If the tree gets to the point where the water can't get through the pot and it's just flowing over the sides, then it's definitely time to repot.
And you were going to ask a question. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
What ended up pruning the foliage?
There are jokes that with certain species, you're supposed to basically just throw a cot outside in the middle of summer and sleep under them because you need to like wake up in the middle of the night and trim them off. Hinokis are pretty bad for that.
The Chinese elm,
Japanese maples, you have to like sit there with tweezers and pluck, 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 pluck. This tree each one of these little fronds is gonna start to pop up, and suddenly, all of a sudden, one day it's gonna look like a ponytail. You know, like on the back of your head, a ponytail. And then I have to go through, and on every single one, I have to go in and pinch and pull, pinch and pull. And so that I'll break off those little tiny tips so that it doesn't try to extend straight, it then bifurcates out. So this is how we get it to subdivide and subdivide and subdivide, is by not letting it get linear growth, but by forcing it to come back and be like, oh, I grew long enough to have a little bud back here, and I took off the tip. It's going to go, oh, we'll go back here. Now we'll go out again. And so all summer long, it's popping the ponytails. So
We're generally trying to create what would generally appear from the top to look a lot like a fractal. So we're trying to actually, exponentially expand the number of sites that the tree is growing at. The more often we do that, and I'm going to explain it, what you're getting at. The more often we
Bonsai math. Here comes the math lesson.
the more often we do that, the smaller the foliage gets. And the smaller the foliage gets, the more in scale it is with the tree, making the tree's scale completely believable. So we have to change the foliage size. A ponderosa pine might have needles between 6 and 8 inches long, but when it's a really small tree, that's not believable. But I can get a ponderosa pine to have 2-inch needles. That's believable. The same thing with the larches, we can make them down to like 1/8 needles, leaves on the larches. That becomes more believable in the scale of the trees. And we do that by just expanding the number of places. We divide the volume of the pot, which is a source of energy, by all the places that we're expanding it. It's like putting more holes in a colander, and all the streams of water are fewer, but it's the same amount of flow. It's all going to come out, just about how much is coming out where. I see. I didn't even use math in the
No,
entire
you
process.
didn't. It was pretty darn good. You didn't like grab a Sharpie and attack the wall or nothing.
Good question.
Get the impression we've done very well.
Yeah, I can collect and grow Rocky Mountain juniper here without too much. We have basically our particular property was purchased for the sole purpose of growing bonsai. So it faces dead south. It has no large trees around it, and it's on the top of a hill. So I get complete sunlight all the time, and a lot of wind to help with any fungal infections, and then we spray for the fungal infections.
And then the good drainage helps it survive the winters.
And the good drainage helps it survive the winters. Yeah, exactly. I grew up in Wyoming, so they're normal trees to me. I didn't realize that they were special until I moved away and learned about bonsai, and then I realized I should have been out there doing that the whole time. And I can't remember where all the great ones I saw were. Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. I can tell you the story of the yellow cedar, the standing yellow cedar. When I actually found that yellow cedar, it was just 2 little fronds sticking out of a peat bog. So we were in the north end of Vancouver Island. Those of you who know Vancouver Island, go to Port Hardy and then go north. That's where we were, and then go north and go up, and then go find some place cold and go there. And you're on the ground in these peat bogs surrounded by heather. And you're in the spaces where you're like, trees don't want to grow. Nobody wants to log there. We actually follow the logging roads to get to the places they don't want to log. Once we get to those spots, that's where we head out. And inside the bogs, we might find 1 or 2 little fronds just sticking out of the bog. And that's when I have to reach down, follow that till I find the roots. Because there's actually a tree underneath the bog. And it's the tree underneath the bog that I'm actually after. Once I find the root base, then I use a saw and I cut out the branch because it's actually a ground layered branch. And then a big
You're missing the part about how big the hole is that you have to move up the bog.
it's a big hole, yeah. You generally have to make a big hole. You're on the ground and you're wet and cold. There's
You're
going
about 2 feet deep.
and about 2 feet deep sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's bog collecting. Collecting in the mountains is often collecting with a crowbar and a pair of pruners. And you just that's all it is you find a pocket. The trees are growing in small natural pockets. Those pockets often fill with the detritus of other trees nearby, the needles of ponderosa pines or other Rocky Mountain junipers that have spent their needles, and those will set in a pocket, and then they'll decay. And as they decay and they make a nutrient-rich space, the seeds from some nearby plant will actually set seed in there and grow. So we have figured there's a number of trees that were growing sometime about the time Columbus got here, that we've actually collected and brought to our home. But those are just these small granite pockets that these trees are living in. And then we put them in great big pots. And that's actually the problem sometimes is like they're living in these small spaces and we need them artistically to be in larger spaces. And we have to slow them down because we don't want them to grow too fast and blow the design. But that's kind of the process is just like hunt. There's some basic rules. Never collect downhill from the truck. That's the first rule. Never collect downhill from the truck. Yeah, that's rule number one. Always go uphill. Because the trees will make their way back. And look out for rattlesnakes. Because when you come down from a hill and you're holding a tree in your arms and you hear the rattlesnake, the problem is that you have to get to the truck, and that could be where the snake is. So when you get close to the truck, just throw the tree in the truck, and that has actually happened.
Miles south of town here, wild cranberry.
Oh.
They're small hemlock.
Mhm.
They're very reminiscent.
Yep. Yeah, mountain hemlock and the western hemlocks, yeah. Both of them make fantastic bonsai. One of the trees we actually didn't bring tonight was a mountain hemlock, but western hemlock does just as well. The mountain hemlock seems to like it a little bit better than the western hemlock, but they are generally stunted by the same spaces that make great cranberry bogs. So it's a great place to look for materials nearby. Any bogs in general tend to make great stunted trees.
And know where you're collecting and get your permits.
Oh,
I
yeah.
gotta say all the legal shit here.
Always collect legally, have a permit, ask for permission.
Private landowners are usually very indifferent to being able to, like, if it's a bog, they're like, I don't know. They don't know that you're going to go get some magnificent thing that you're going to spend the next 60 years of your life loving on.
Sometimes they don't care. Yeah.
And they don't care. Sometimes in like Wyoming and on these high desert areas, they're like, I don't want my cows to trip on those things. Take them away.
And you can't make a fence post out of it. So.
You can't make a fence post out of it. This is true. They're too twisty, low to the ground. But BLM lands are great places to be able to collect from. And interestingly enough, Christmas tree permits, dig them up, don't cut them down. If it's in a good spot and you're in legal collecting ground, they don't care if you dug it up versus cut it down. So there are ways to legitimately get gorgeous trees with sweat equity, because getting trees like this already in place and in situ and already in a bonsai pot, they're prohibitive cost-wise. And so being able to go out and collect legally, ethically, fill your holes, leave no trace, all those good Girl Scout, Boy Scout things are very important parts of that process. We don't like people to get all excited and run out and start suddenly collecting trees without knowing what they're doing, because the attrition rate on collected trees can be very high. And for people who don't know what they're doing, it's nearly 100% attrition. In other words, you collected it, you killed it. But if you know what you're doing and you understand the aftercare and you know that 90% of it is having the patience to put it in a papoose pack where we basically take well, anyways, bundle the little suckers up and then keep them in that for the next couple of years without changing anything other than popping some holes in the bottom so the water will get out and just leaving them be. Because patience, if you rush bonsai, that's the end of bonsai. You really have to be willing to take the time.
And
And it's 8 o'clock, and I think they're about ready to run us out of the building. So only a couple more questions. Yes, sir? All year long? No. No. Yes, because we plant in 100% inorganic. If we had the trees inorganic, then we'd need some kind of way to protect them from the amount of rain that we get, because otherwise the particulates would get clogged, the trees would drown. So because we, like, literally in the summer, when I water this, it's just going to go whoosh and come out the bottom. That's how free flowing it is.
The only time there's a cover at all is during the summer when we bring shade cover.
Yes,
For some of the more delicate trees, they'll get
the
shade cover.
maples and some of the mountain hemlocks that are a little more sensitive. And the one thing that we do in the winter, which is really cute, we call it bonsai hokey pokey, is when if we have trees that are from Japan, like Satsuki azaleas, that don't quite like to get to that 17, 19 degree weather, and they would die, then we have to take all of those trees, the redwoods, the Satsukis, and put them in the garage. And they stay in there for a couple of days at about 40 degrees, because we'll put a little heater in there. And then as soon as it's warm enough, they go right back out again. So we call it pokey pokey. In and out.
Can I do a quick-
Yes?
Yeah.
I'm Jill Hughes, I'm the Vice President of the Indigenous Bonsai Society. We meet the first Sunday each and every month from 2 to 4 at the,
Splow and Port James. Or
yes, that
Yeah.
one.
yeah.
Railroad Bridge is Swim. There is a newsletter back there, our current newsletter I brought for everyone, if they'd like to take one home. And we would love to see you as members.
Or just visit first time. You don't have to join until until you get the lay of the land. But I will tell you the Indigenous Club is pretty fabulous. They do ask us to come up every once in a while to give presentations and talk about bonsai and do demonstrations and things. So as a matter of fact, we'll be going. By the way, honey, you haven't told yet. We're going to go do later this fall, this late summer.
Okay.
Something. Anyway, there we go.
So with that, let's thank her. A little bit if you want to come up and see the tree.
Mhm. Yes, please
And
feel free to
ask
get
any
up
further
close
questions.
and personal.
Interested in the custodial position, just come and chat with Renee or Jordan.
And to everybody who watched us online, thank you so
Yeah.
very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You know most of the people on there. And stickers. If you have kids
Sticker.
or you just like stickers, we brought stickers, business cards.